I'll give you your Christmas present now if you'll give me mine. I shook my head at breakfast. But it's Christmas now. Breakfast. Whatever you're giving me, she said, I hope I don't like it. You'll have to keep them anyway, because the man at the aquarium said he positively wouldn't take them back. He said they'd already bitten the tails off the...
I'm your host, Sergio Angelini, and welcome to Tipping My Fedora, where we discuss movies, books, TV, radio, and much more besides, all from the darker side of the street. Scott K Ratner is a Southern California-based writer, magician, and actor, whose endeavours are largely rooted in his interest in Golden Age detective fiction and classic-era Hollywood cinema. He has written the libretto and lyrics for 2 whodunit musicals, All Talking, All Singing, All Murder, and Murder on the High Seas, and a one-act Agatha Christie-related comedy, Kill a Better Mousetrap, as well as several nerdy articles for such magazines as Crime and Detective Stories and Mystery Scene. His magic act was once publicly praised by no less than Harry Blackstone Jr. As a magician and theme park entertainer, he worked for over 2 decades apiece at Disneyland and Knott's Berry Farms. Scott says about himself that, I quote, his views on detective fiction and classic cinema are frequently unpopular, but he feels they are logically sound and carefully considered, if admittedly often poorly articulated. End quote. The first part of the statement seems harsh and the second not entirely true. But come along now and make your own minds up as we discuss one of our favourite books and films, The Thin Man. Scott, it's so brilliant to have you here. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast and sitting here to talk about, well, not fedoras.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. Talking about this kind of stuff is really exciting for me.
So, okay, icebreaker question right off the bat. Do you have a definition of film noir?
I do, and I warned you it's a snarky one. But
Good.
But I think it's unique. And my definition of noir is that idea which hogs all the attention and which people want to discuss everything else in terms of. And that's a snarky answer, but it's not a facetious answer because it's actually sincere. When I say that it's the idea that hogs all the attention, I believe it's true. And that's not saying that noir is not a wonderful thing and it's not of great merit, but it has gotten so much attention over the last few years. I know I recently went over to the Margaret Herrick Library of the Academy Library in Beverly Hills.
Oh, I'm so jealous. I'd love to go there.
Oh, it's a beautiful place, wonderful place. And I was looking for books on one of my basic interests, which is film adaptations of whodunits, basically. Mm-hmm. And they've got a book or two. And then I look at noir, which is right next to it, and it's got 5 shelves. And I will tell you that I was on a conversation, on one of those internet conversations. It wasn't a person-to-person thing. It was many people, like a forum, throwing in ideas. And Eddie Muller, the czar of noir.
Oh, the czar of noir, yeah.
Yes, was on there. And at one point, I felt myself getting resentful, not at him, but just at everything being brought into noir, basically. And I said something, again, snarky, something to the effect of, noir isn't the only game in town. I happen to love Lubitsch films. And Mr. Muller, in a very gentlemanly way, wrote back, well, I like Lubitsch films too. And it really put me in my place. I realized how churlish I had been, because it wasn't his fault and it's not noir's fault. Noir is great and it's worth celebrating. It's just that I see people like it so much that they want to bring everything else into it. And that's something I know on your conversation with Sheldon Hall. You get ridiculous examples where people will talk about, the kind of thing where you're almost getting to Bambi being anthropomorphic forest noir, or Hamilton being revolutionary hip hop noir, or, that kind of thing. And you say, well, if you look at it, anything has these certain elements of this, so you can bring it in. And I think that kind of loses the whole point of it. But what I think is almost worse sometimes, and I'm going to hit you on this one, but it's just because everybody pulls into it, is the questions of qualification, of does this qualify as? And I know on yours you had a little tagline on your on one of the posts on Facebook talking about your recent episode and saying Don Siegel's Invasion of the Body Snatchers, is it the genuine article or just a wannabe? Now I know you were being playful with that, but there is that kind of implication that everything wants to be noir. That the wannabe is the idea is that that's what everything aspires to be. But I say, Invasion of the Body Snatcher didn't want to be noir. It wanted to be what it is. Green for Danger didn't want to be noir. Even noir didn't want to be noir, if you think about it. I mean, if you think about like Out of the Past, the people who made this film, I'm sure they highly respected Double Indemnity and maybe got some inspiration from it, but they weren't trying to make another Double Indemnity. They weren't trying to match the tropes. They didn't want to fit into this box. The only people who really want to fit things into those kind of boxes in terms of filmmaking are the producers, the Hollywood producers who say, give me another Star Wars, or the people who are making pastiches or parody. If you're making Dead Women Don't Wear Plaid, you're going to watch the noirs very carefully and try to find every trope so that you can match it. But other than that, people are trying to make the film they want to make.
I think it does tend to suck up an awful lot of oxygen, and it's overly applied as a term. No question about it. It is a retrospective categorization, so therefore it's one that you apply post facto, which creates some issues, and it's sort of unique in that way, which is what gives it this unusual currency, because I think it's the only one of its kind genuinely that comes across as being a bit cool. And I think the fact that it's kind of cool is why it gets applied to, The Matrix, if you like, techno-noir. Does that help you enjoy The Matrix? Well, actually, sort of, because one knows, for instance, that the Wachowskis had made a genuine neo-noir, Bound, which is a fantastic movie. So it's not that they were unaware of it. Equally, that doesn't help you necessarily enjoy the film more. It does help people sell it more. What is also true, though, and this is the bit where I'm not 100% agreeing with you, is, as you rightly say, I think, that the people who were making them at the time in the 40s and 50s, in the heyday of noir, as we now call it, of course they weren't saying, give me another noir. No, but they will have noticed the success of Double Indemnity and maybe Farewell My Lovely, and the producers would have said, I want another one like that. Right. Their inability to give it a label that we would now recognize doesn't change the fact that what they're saying is, I want it to be a bit like that. I mean, Farewell My Lovely is always a very good example because there are multiple iterations. It exists in a kind of pre-noir state because it's a Falcon movie to start with, and then it becomes a genuine Philip Marlowe movie, and then it becomes a neo-noir. It then gets filmed, the novel gets filmed again with Robert Mitchum in the mid-1970s during the nostalgia boom, and therefore it's made at a time when people know what noir really is.
There it is, trying to match it.
That's right. So it's interesting, isn't it? You can compare these three different versions. It's sort of the same story in their own way. They're both all really good. I really like the Falcon film. I think it's great fun. I really do. And it's reasonably faithful. It includes stuff that is not included in either of the other two versions. In some respects, it's more faithful to the novel than the other versions are. Does that make it a better film if you're comparing the three? Nah, not necessarily. But I think that that's also, how studios operated at the time. If something was successful, you did it again. You have your own hit, you did it again. You have a pair of actors who work well together, or maybe with the same director, you pair them all up again and again and again and again. We know that was one of the big problems, particularly at Warner Brothers, I think. One of the reasons why so many of their big stars would go on suspension, because this endless repetitiveness when it came to making certain films. The fact that those films are fabulous, and I would happily watch 10 of them, even if they're ever so slightly different, well, that's a different thing. But I suspect as an actor who didn't want to get too rigidly typecast without losing their careers, you can see the problem. But having reached this point of the conversation, I've got to ask you my second icebreaker question. So, sure. If we accept that noir as a category is, not necessarily always that helpful, and it's something that exists in the ether, you would have been aware of it as a fan of movies. What do you think was the first film that made an impression on you that you would say, well, yeah, it's advertised, shall we say, as film noir?
Well, unfortunately, I can't get to an interesting title on this. I come to the most inarguable noir there is for me, which I think for most people would be Double Indemnity. But that's an easy answer, and I don't usually like giving the cliche answer, but in this case for me it obviously, as you say, it ticks all the boxes, or at least as much as any film can. And for that reason, it's not only an inspiration, but also it's the source of parody. It's the source of everything else. And I happen to love the film. But even there, when we talk about classification, one of the reasons I adore the film is because it actually pulls on aspects that I enjoy about puzzle plot mysteries, in the sense that the alibi in Double Indemnity is straight out of a Golden Age detective fiction novel. The idea of an event made to appear later than actual occurrence, that kind of thing. Not necessarily on a train, but the whole idea of doing that kind of thing and the way the alibi is set up. And for me, one of the moments that makes it a great film is when Keyes enters Walter Neff's room, just walks in and saying he broke his leg.
What's on your mind?
That broken leg. The guy had a broken leg.
What are you talking about?
Talking about Dietrichson. He had accident insurance, didn't he?
Yeah.
Then he broke his leg, didn't he?
So what?
And he didn't put in a claim. Why didn't he put in a claim? Why?
What are you driving at?
Well, then, I had dinner 2 hours ago. And it's stuck halfway.
Little man of yours is acting up again, huh?
There's something wrong with the Dietrichson case.
And he realizes there's a discrepancy. He's got a discrepancy clue there. So these are ideas that are really out of Golden Age detective fiction. And just one of the many ways in which genres overlap. For me, that's one of the reasons I love the film, although I love all the stylistics as well. And I'm one of those people who have never believed the stylistics of noir are in any way incompatible with what I call the engine of Golden Age detective fiction, the puzzle plotting. That's a good example right there. The alibi and the discrepancy clue there. I don't know how well Chinatown is accepted as noir.
Oh, I think so. Yeah.
Good. Or as neo-noir, whatever. But at the same time,
Yes.
The apple core clue. That's a Golden Age detective fiction puzzle plot clue. It's a misinterpretation of, a verbal misinterpretation. That's, for me, again, that's a highlight of Chinatown, is that particular clue.
So how did you get into detective stories, mystery movies, and become a mystery movie aficionado? How did it all happen to you, Scott? Tell us a bit about you.
I was born in 1964. So in the mid-'70s, I would say there was a wave of interest in puzzle plotting, at least as seen through film and television. And I think we've had about 4 waves of this since the Golden Age of detective fiction. One in the mid-'30s, one maybe in the mid-'40s. That's an arguable one. There's just 3 films together, which are really high points, I think. And so they're included. Nothing really in the 50s, nothing in the 60s. But then back in the 70s again, we had The Last of Sheila. We had Sleuth. We had Murder on the Orient Express. We had Death on the Nile. And then on television, we had Ellery Queen and we had Banachek. And we had TV movies like One of My Wives is Missing, or Killjoy, or things like that. So these were all hitting at the same time. And I happen to have a copy of, at my house, of The Seven Dials Mystery, Agatha Christie, which I picked up. That was my introduction there. And so between that, these were all hitting at one time. And I don't know about you, but I feel there's a fairly reliable barometer of this kind of wave of interest is the inclusion of denouement flashbacks in works.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
It's not necessarily a guarantee, but when you see a lot of them, it kind of means that, people are interested in this again. They're interested in the connection between puzzle and solution. And so that happened during that time. So I was 9, 10, 11 years old, and I was caught in with watching Ellery Queen, seeing The Last of Sheila, Death on the Nile. And these were fascinating to me. And then I read all of the Agatha Christie's. And then I went beyond that, even though I'm still a very poor reader. Agatha Christie's partly my style because she's so easy to read. But that's what happened. But I went on, to John Dixon Carr and Christiana Brand and Anthony Barclay and people like that. Yeah. So that's basically the way I got into it.
One of my personal heroes would be, Levinson and Link on TV.
Yeah.
In the 70s, because I think that whether it was through Columbo, which is, of course, really is a Golden Age show. It's an inverted mystery, but it's a Golden Age show. And then
I should have included that, by the way, in my list.
Yeah, and of course, and then they produced the Ellery Queen show, and then they did those fantastic TV movies, Murder by Natural Causes, having a seemingly endless series of twists, for instance, and then a couple more. And I think that made a huge difference. And yet, they were writers who were otherwise predominantly associated with quite serious dramas, quite groundbreaking stuff on things on violence in schools, on homosexuality, all kinds of themes. The Execution of Private Slovak is probably one of their best productions, and it's about someone who was executed for cowardice in the Second World War, the only one, and certainly the last one, as I understand it. They came at it from all kinds of ways, so I always think they're fantastic.
This Hollywood star is about to be murdered. Who is responsible for his death? Was it his jealous wife?
Are you accusing me of something?
The frightened prop man?
And they think I put in live bullets.
The humiliated director?
Methinks the lady doth protest too much.
The supercharged press agent?
Actor shot to death on movie set?
The frustrated actor?
Poor Gilbert won't be playing the character. Maybe you'll give me back some of my moments.
Or was it someone else? Match wits with Ellery Queen and see if you can guess who done
it. Today, we're going to talk about a terrific 1930s mystery, one that exists in people's minds in different places and different ways, but all you have to say is The Thin Man, and most people know what you're talking about. But we're going to be looking at it in, I think, a fresh and original way. And we're going to be talking about the book, as well as, of course, the classic movie. So over to you, really, Scott. Do we start with the book? How do you want to tackle this one?
I think I'll tackle it directly where we came from, maybe my path on it, which actually started with the film. But my path coming from what we spoke about with the interest in puzzle plot filming, because I saw the film, I saw The Thin Man, I'm guessing about 1976. I saw it on television. I don't know the year, 76 or 77. I think I'd already heard of it, and I saw it, and I was at once enchanted, as most people are, by the central character relationship between the two protagonists. I adore them. William Powell's still my favorite actor. And Myrna has got to be either my first or second favorite actress. I love them. I love them together. I love them in the film. And I think they're at their very best in the film. But even at the time, I was disappointed by what I saw as a lack of what I saw in other puzzle plots of the time. The cluing, the dynamic between puzzle and solution that I find so interesting and so fascinating. And basically, when I would communicate this at age 12, whatever, to people, they would basically tell me what I think is this oversimplified bifurcation, which you hear to this day, which was, well, that's just the way American detective stories work. American detective stories are about the journey, and British detective stories are about the destination. You enjoy the American story, as a cliche or as a archetype, you enjoy the American films and stories the way you do the big sleep. It's the ride. You're enjoying the ride. The British detective stories, you're really interested in the solution. You're really interested in what happens, how it all fits together.
Yeah.
That was the justification for the fact that The Thin Man was, to me, disappointing as a puzzle plot. And I was fine with that, answer. I still loved The Thin Man for what it was. But then I came across a few quotes a little later on that really made me wonder about this. Two of them were by John Dixon Carr.
John Dixon Carr, my absolute favorite Golden Age author. So
there you are.
Yeah.
And here I'm not in any way disagreeing with him, which I sometimes do. The first one is from his 1949 Doubleday Mystery Guild essay about types of detective fiction. And he was discussing tough writers. I guess where you could say hard-boiled writers.
Yeah.
And he said, I didn't like them, that is, until suddenly, amid a spinning of blood, brass knuckles, and flying bodies, I discovered that the author was calmly inserting the evidence into the bureau drawer. Now, he didn't, in this quote, say exactly who he was talking about, but it's pretty clear by another quote who he was talking about, because in another thing, when he's giving a review of Raymond Chandler's The Simple Art of Murder, and he is really bashing Raymond Chandler in many ways. But in the middle of it, he says, Mr. Hammett has never disdained clues and has always given them fairly. Now, that's quite a thing to say for John Dixon Carr to say that about Hammett. Later on, people asked Hammett which was his favorite of his works, and he answered The Glass Key was his best work. And his reason was the clues were nicely placed, although no one seemed to notice. Now, all of a sudden, this is a big deal to me because we've realized now that Hammett, even according to John Dixon Carr, was someone very capable of cluing with payoff and cluing with interest. And from his own quote, he was someone very interested in cluing, enough that it made The Glass Key his favorite of his works, or what he considered the best of his works, because of the cluing. So here you have a guy who's both competent, or more than competent, and interested in cluing. And yet in his next work after The Glass Key, which is 3 years later, his biggest break in writing, he writes The Thin Man, which is noticeably devoid of cluing, or cluing that has payoff. And so for me, that was kind of like that moment in Rear Window when L.B. Jeffries notices that the flowers grew shorter over, it's
right.
Suddenly,
okay.
What could explain this? So that's when I went to the book, and I read the book. And at first, the book didn't help either, because not only was there a lot of information in it and a lot more detail that doesn't pay off at the end, but there is this big elephant in the room. There's this treatise on cannibalism.
Yeah.
That he hands to Gilbert, the young man who's interested in all things taboo and perverse, right? I was able to check the word count on that.
It's 2,000, right? Or what is it?
Yeah, 1,702
right.
words. That's greater than the length of the Declaration of Independence with all the signatures and the Gettysburg Address combined. All right?
A perfect comparison, I feel. Yes, I'm with you.
Right. But that's a lot of words for something that means nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And so people have tried to come up with explanations for this. And I've read the explanations. And because we're pattern-seeking creatures, we're looking for the answer to why we put in this big thing. Because it's never clearly explicated at the end what this has to do with anything. And people have come up with explanations that it's symbolic of the cannibalism of high society. How we're all, and I can buy that. But that's not particularly applicable to this novel any more than any other cynical novel of its time. That might as well be in The Great Gatsby, It could be anywhere. And it's not really clear that that's what it is. So that really didn't help. And it was one more thing that just doesn't pay off. Then I got to the solution. And the solution didn't give me any more clue payoff at all. But I suddenly realized it has a running theme throughout the solution. The whole last chapter is basically made up of Nora expressing her dissatisfaction with the untidiness and uncertainty of the solution. And with Nick saying basically, well, that's the way things are in real life. And it was very much like that moment in E.T. I don't know if you, I haven't seen the film in almost 40 years.
Same here.
I assume you've seen the film.
Oh, many times as a kid.
Yeah. And there's the scene in which Elliot tells his friends that E.T. has to go back to his home planet. And one of the kids says, well, can't he just beam up? And Elliot looks at him and kind of rolls his eyes and says, this is reality, Greg. And it was a very memorable moment for me. I remember that of the whole film. But one of the reasons I remember that is because the power of that moment is not only that they're making a distinction between real life and science fiction, but they're making it within the context of a science fiction story. And that's what The Thin Man is doing throughout that final chapter, many, many, many times over. I can read you a few examples, and if you want to cut them out, you can here.
No, that'd be great.
Nora says, but that seems so loose. And Nick says, when the murders are committed by mathematicians, you can solve them by mathematics. Most of them aren't, and this one wasn't. I don't want to go against your idea of what's right and wrong, but when I say he probably dissected the body so we could carry it into town in bags, I'm only saying what seems most probable. And Nora says, probably. And Nick says, it's a word you've got to use a lot in this business. And then Nora later says, it's not very neat. And Nick says, that's neat enough to send him to the chair, and that's all that counts. And this continues all the way until the very last line of the book. The very last line of the book is Nora saying, that may be, but it's all pretty unsatisfactory. So, and my favorite example, this is my favorite example. I love this. Throughout this final chapter, there are little parenthetical notations, which are kind of interesting because they're like, editor's notes, obviously made by Nick. But since the whole thing is written by Nick anyway, in first person past tense, it's as if he wrote the story right after it happened. And then a month or two later, he added these little parenthetical quotes. And so at one point he's writing, we also found a table with a very faint trace of what we hope is human blood, not quite scrubbed out. The scientific boys are making shavings of it now to see if they can soak out any results for us. And then in parentheses, he writes, it turned out to be beef blood. I love that. And that really makes the point. I mean, here's a story that's very sparse. So, but even when it does bring up something that's possibly a connection between puzzle and solution, he says, no, it's arbitrary. It's very funny. And it's just another way he hammers in this point of Nick saying, look, everything doesn't pay off. And then all of a sudden, if you read this, you realize, oh, that's the meaning of the cannibalism digression. The point of these apparently arbitrary digression about cannibalism is that it is an arbitrary digression. It's one of the many things in real life that you come across that doesn't have to do with the solution. And it's really, I would say, if there's a thesis to the novel, The Thin Man, it's that unlike detective fiction, real life is not governed by Chekhov's guns.
Well, certainly, I think if we think of the novel as primarily a comedy of manners, or a comedy of manners first, and let's call it a detective story second, then absolutely, in terms of how we're depicting these very strange characters in so many ways. I mean, he's the whole cannibal thing. I mean, after all, he's a very, very strange lad who has something of a fixation on his mother. And most of the book is about going from one party to the next and one conversation to the next. And Nick and Nora are fairly smashed throughout the whole thing, really. So and that's and of course that's very Dashiell Hammett and Lillian Hellman. That was kind of what their life was like, and so it is also this reflection on their existence at the time. They were very merry. He was, running through all his money and just didn't care. And in a way, that's what I think The Thin Man, particularly as a book, feels like. It's about rich people out in the town, right?
Right. Except it has something that one of the aspects of the translation to film is that there's a self-awareness in the novel of the fact that this is not really a happy story. We're having fun, but we're headed to oblivion. It's kind of the same thing. It's what I call the Fitzgerald trap, which is Fitzgerald knew that the world he was living in is not going to create happiness, but that didn't keep him from living in it. Fitzgerald knew where his life was going. Yeah. And it's the same thing in the novel, The Thin Man. There's a lot of malaise in there and a lot of ennui in there. The hangovers are much more serious in the novel. And that's one of the, at least commercially positive things the Hackett's did. I really take away from what everybody thinks the Hackett's did in the translation, because they really did not make it a wittier film. Most of the wit of the film is there in the novel, but they did make it a much cheerier film. They only brought up the bright side of the Nick and Nora relationship. And for that, I'm actually grateful.
Who is she?
Oh, darling, I was hoping I wouldn't have to answer that.
Come on.
Well, Dorothy is really my daughter. You see, it was spring in Venice. And I was so young, I didn't know what I was doing. We're all like that on my father's side.
By the way, how is your father's side?
Oh, it's much better, thanks. And yours?
Say, how many drinks have you had?
This will make 6 martinis.
All right. Will you bring me 5 more martinis? Leo, line them right up here.
Yes, ma'am.
It doesn't search into the problem as deeply, and it makes alcoholism more a fictional disease in which you get a light hangover, but it doesn't destroy your life. The novel is not an entirely cheerful story. It's talking about the fun with a knowing that after everybody leaves the party, I'm going to be alone here and I feel emptiness.
The film is released within about, I think, 5 months of the book coming out in hardback, which is sort of amazing. I think the book came out in January 1934, having been serialized in Redbook the previous month in December. The film comes out in May and was shot by W.S. Van Dyke, Woodbridge Strong Van Dyke II, who, can you imagine being just, two people actually call that?
Woody Van Dyke?
Yeah, Woody Van Dyke, who was also known as One Take Woody.
Right.
So MGM gave him, depends who you listen to, but it's basically 2.5 weeks to shoot that film.
Right.
And I don't know about you, but I've always felt that it feels a little bit like a secret Warner Brothers film made at MGM.
I would go into that also because I have a prejudice against MGM, and I have,
oh, do tell.
Well, no, it's just the fact that I find MGM for the most part, and its product of that time overrated, and very little of it works. Whereas almost every 1933 Warner Brothers film clicks. By saying that, you're kind of fitting it into my basic prejudices, which is by saying it's more of a Warner Brothers film. And yet, to be honest, in many ways, it's a little bit like that. But if you think about had it been directed by a Warner Brothers director, let's say a stylist like Curtiz or Dearly or stuff like this, it wouldn't be nearly, I don't think, the film that it is. There would have been many more shots and many more close-ups, and it would have been much more highly directed. And one of the nice things about Woody Van Dyke's direction is that you can call him a lazy director or just a character-based director, but he just realized, hey, the interest here is Powell and Loy. Let's keep the camera on them. Let's not cut. Let's not do any dynamic editing. Outside of the montages, this is not a film led by direction.
No, there's a few tracking shots and things like that, aren't there? I think the introduction of Asta and Nora is actually interestingly done with a forward tracking shot, which is unexpected, because most of the film isn't like that. And it looks great. And of course, it's got a great cinematographer. It's James Wong Howe. Now, I was going to ask you quickly, just because you're, well, maybe not quickly, but you're such a William Powell fan. Powell had gone through some interesting sort of studio changes, and he got sort of nicked from Paramount by Warner Brothers and so on, which also has this kind of effect in terms of his persona. And so that by the time he's at MGM and he gets cast in this, he's bringing a certain amount of baggage. And I was going to ask you to just sort of fill in the blanks there for us, because I think it's fascinating.
Probably for him, it was, the world opened up, because if you look at Philo Vance, it is a stock type, and he didn't go very far in that the trailer for The Thin Man, which includes both Philo Vance and Nick Charles, Powell playing against himself. It's very amusing. I don't think Powell did put any particular effort into making the great distinctions between the two.
What happened if it isn't Philo Vance? I beg your pardon? Who said that? I haven't seen you since you solved the Kennel murder case. How are you? Well, for the love of... Nick Charles, what are you doing up there? Impersonating a book cover? Shh. I'm working on a case. Don't tell me you've gone back to detective work. I thought you had turned respectable. Didn't you get married? Oh, didn't I? Vance, I married a girl in $1 million. I heard it was a girl with $1 million. Well, same thing. I've become a California gentleman. I never heard of such a thing. What are you doing here in New York? Well, it seems that Clark Gable is making some personal appearances here, which interests my wife. And there's a very good bar at the Ritz, which is all right with me. So we popped into town to play. But would you believe it? Before you could say Metro Goldwyn Mayer, I stepped right into the middle of a baffling murder mystery, and they put me to work. Well, you poor fellow, you have my deepest sympathy. I can use it. Believe me, Vance, this case is a toughie.
But they are very different characters, and I think that's the tipping point right there. Is, in a sense, that trailer represents where things changed for Powell, and actually where things changed in the genre for motion pictures. Because if you look at the Kennel murder case and you look at The Thin Man, there are a lot of superficial similarities. They both have William Powell as a suave New York detective with a dog, solving a New York murder case among the smart set, etc. But in terms of the type of film they are, they're very different. One is the Kennel Murder Case is definitely both director-based and plot-based, plot-driven and director-driven. By the way, Kennel Murder Case is another of my very favorite films, but I think it's an almost opposite film of The Thin Man, because as I say, it's all about the star of the Kennel Murder Case is Michael Curtiz, and maybe second would be S.S. Van Dyne. They are the stars. It's Van Dyne's plot, and it's Curtiz's direction. William Powell plays the role well, as he always played films well, but there's not much to play outside the fact that he's elegant and he gives the liquid U sound, to everything. There's nothing beyond that. The Thin Man, as you say, it's about Nick and Nora. The film, at least, is primarily about Nick and Nora. That's its selling point. It's not only its selling point, but as far as I'm concerned, it is its chief charm and chief virtue. And all of a sudden, he's playing a character in a relationship that really works well because the relationship is tremendously believable. Even if you don't believe other things in the film, and even if you don't believe people can drink as much as they do and not be throwing up all the time, you believe their relationship. At least I do. I've always believed it. It has a backstory. As soon as you watch it, you realize, oh, these people have a connection. And you may not know the details of the backstory, but you believe that backstory. You don't believe these people met on the set for the first time. And also, for Powell, this was he particularly disliked what Warner's did for him, or to him, the way they treated him. Yeah.
Let me interrupt you because this is terribly important. So you're a huge fan of the Paramount Pictures studio and the Paramount era. Powell had started playing the sleuth Philo Vance at Paramount in the silent era, just as the movies were sort of converting to sound, and played the role 3 times.
Right.
And they were successful in their own way, although one of them in particular sort of diverts from the novel in extraordinary ways, which is just sort of weird considering how popular the books were. And then Warner's sort of broke the gentleman's agreement between studios and did this sort of big talent raid on Paramount, right, and took a lot of their stars, including William Powell, who ended up at Warner Brothers, and ultimately got him to play Philo Vance again in what I think most people think is the best of the Philo Vance movies, The Kennel Murder Case, which is absolutely one of my favorite films. Michael Curtiz is probably my favorite studio era director, so you'll get no argument from me. Yeah, he wasn't very happy. I mean, he made some very good films at Warner Brothers.
I think he made his best films retrospectively. I think he made such a concentration of great films at Warner's. There's a difference between the product and the way someone feels at a place. I think his MGM films, I'm very grateful that he went to MGM because of The Thin Man and a few other comedies he made that I really like. But I think for the most part, MGM didn't know how to treat its stars in terms of their legacy. Very few stars at MGM really get a high percentage of terrific films. And they get, let's face it, they get the Jack Conways and the Richard Thorpes and,
Norman Taurog, yes.
Exactly. They get these guys who don't have a real high batting average. They occasionally make a terrific film, but Sam Wood, these are not, these aren't the people you mentioned on the auteur list or on the greatest directors of all time.
Got more interesting after he met William Cameron Menzies, I think, in the 40s. But yeah, absolutely. In the 30s, yeah, he how do you tell the difference between him and Sidney Franklin? Absolutely.
Right. But from Powell's standpoint, they gave him probably a lot more money. They gave him more breathing time. He didn't have to make as many films per year. It was a great place, even though he wasn't retiring for another 20 years. It was a great place to retire. Let's put it that way. He was given from day one, he was given the great treatment. He wasn't given the best films, for the most part, he still had to go out to make, My Man Godfrey elsewhere. He still had to go out to Warner's to make, Mr. Roberts at the end. So I'd say a very high percentage of the great films he made during his stay at MGM were loan outs, but they treated him royally. I think the problem with Warner Brothers is not that they weren't terrific films, but he was rushed into things. He probably wasn't given as much script approval. He wasn't given, as many perks. Let's put it that way. It truly was a factory. and it felt like a factory. And that's what his complaints were about.
Now, from previous conversations you and I have engaged in, I very much got the impression that you felt that in translating the book to the film, from making the Thin Man novel to Thin Man the movie, which was scripted by the husband and wife team of Albert Hackett and Francis Goodrich.
Right.
You, I think, feel that in many ways they kind of either missed the point of the book or deliberately ignored it, shall we say, for commercial reasons. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I definitely think they missed the point. I don't think they chose not to. And I'll tell you why. I was already discussing how this point is driven home many times in the final scene on the idea that the difference between detective fiction and detective reality. And no one was more suited to make that distinction than Dashiell Hammett, who is both the best-selling mystery writer and who had been a Pinkerton operative. So he was in a great place to make this distinction. And that's what that final chapter did. Now, the Hacketts, that's what they call themselves. The Hacketts, I think, were wonderful screenwriters, but they admitted they had never read a mystery story before, and they didn't know anything about it. In fact, they tried not to write it. And there's even letters from Frances Goodrich to someone saying basically she doesn't like the book, and they don't know what they're going to make of it, and hopefully it'll get canceled. Nonetheless, I think they did a wonderful job, except they didn't understand what Hammett was saying in that last chapter. It's pretty clear, because if the Hacketts had understood that, they really had three reasonable options. One is they could keep all those arbitrary elements and then go ahead and make the point that Hammett was using them to make. This doesn't seem very likely that they would go this route, because, literary critique is not exactly the kind of thing that shows up in entertainment films, especially in 1934, So it wasn't very likely that they were going to go that route. But that was one option. The second option was to add real clues and make it a real puzzle plot. Well, that was also very unlikely. There are very few instances in which the film adaptation of a detective novel is stronger in cluing than the novel was. There are a few rare examples, but certainly the Hacketts weren't the people to do it, if there was anyone, because they admitted they knew nothing about mystery writing. But I don't think, had there been true puzzle plot writers among the screenwriters there, I don't think it would have been a bad idea, because unlike some people, I don't think puzzle plotting and hard-boiled style or noir style or screwball comedy style or any style is incompatible. And I think we've seen, you don't have to say, oh, this is character-driven or this is plot-driven. You can have both. We have Knives Out, which is a great example. The best episodes of Monk, I think, are great examples. Green for Danger, probably more puzzle plot than comedy, but still, you can have both. So they could have kept all the Nick and Nora stuff and had that final scene have payoff, but they didn't go that route. So that's the second route. And the third route they could have gone, which is probably the most practical, and which I would have recommended, was to reduce the excess plotting to an absolute bare minimum. After all, the novel started with Dorothy approaching Nick regarding her missing father. That's also the way the Lux radio adaptation does it.
I beg your pardon. Aren't you Mr. Nick Charles, the detective?
Yes, I'm Nick Charles.
I thought I recognized you. My name is Dorothy Winans.
Oh, yes, how do you do?
Do you mind if I sit down for a moment?
No, but I'm expecting my wife in a few minutes. You don't mind explaining your presence to her?
Oh, of course. That's my fiancé over there at the other table.
Oh, well, that makes everything all right, doesn't it? Sit down.
Thank you.
Your name is,
Dorothy Winans. I'm Clyde Winans' daughter.
Clyde Winans. Oh, yes, of course. Your father was having some trouble about one of his inventions a few years ago. I handled the case for him.
I know. That's why I want to speak to you now.
Oh. Well, I'm not practicing anymore, Miss Winans. You see, I've retired.
Please, Mr. Charles. I need you.
Oh. What seems to be the trouble?
It's Dad. He went away about 3 months ago, and I haven't heard from him. Not a word. I'm worried sick.
They don't have these opening sequences of exposition, and they don't need them. And I feel strongly about this. I know this is an unpopular thing, because a lot of people like those opening scenes, and I admit they're beautifully filmed. I mean, how James Wong Howe did these whole things in 16 days is remarkable. I think maybe in some ways something like The Thin Man may be the most impressive work James Wong Howe ever did. Not that it's his best cinematography, but considering the fact that he was doing it under these kind of restraints, it's just extraordinary. So these opening shots are beautiful, and they include Edward Ellis and Natalie Moorhead. Well, Edward Ellis is in 3 of my 5 favorite films of 1934 and is actually involved with 4 out of 10. So I'm a big Edward Ellis fan. I love him. And Natalie Moorhead, who's kind of a symbol of whodunits of the time, not only in things like The Thin Man or the Benson murder case, but also a whole bunch of Poverty Row films, including one that's on my big wish list, 15 Wives, which is a film that I've
never seen it. Yeah.
What?
Never seen it. Yeah.
No, nobody's seen it or in many years. It's a Chesterfield film, but this is of great interest to me because not only is a whodunit, which automatically makes it of interest to me, but it's also a whodunit in which one of the suspects is an evangelist named Sibylla Crumb, played by Margaret Dumont. I mean,
right.
I don't think you could ask. I don't think you can ask for more. Anybody who isn't interested in that is not my kind of person, personally. So she's in Discarded Lovers. She's in the King murder case and a few others. So she's really simple. I love having her around, but the scenes are absolutely unnecessary. There's very little in it that is not explained to Nick in scenes immediately following it. I think I know the reason why they put this in. Let's face it, they were not mystery writers, and they were also in the early 30s, after we had all these very talky films in the early 30s, because people had to stick around the microphone. There was probably a big push for the axiom of show, don't tell. But I think that axiom is incomplete. I think the axiom really should be show, don't tell, if you have a choice between one or the other. But if you're going to have to tell anyway, don't show, because it's just redundant. And that's what you have in the case of The Thin Man.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, is that they're doing the conventional thing, which is what you would get in a standard whodunit, which is that you're introducing all the characters, and if one of them's going to get knocked off, it's probably the character that nobody likes. And, so you've kind of established who's the one that nobody likes, although, of course, the story isn't structured that way. It's the whole first reel, which is what you'd expect kind of in maybe a Charlie Chan movie or what have you, these sorts of things. But it doesn't really work here because, that's not where the interest lies. And they're not, as you say, they're not really setting up anything except introducing the characters in almost in a kind of theatrical way.
In the VHS days, I made the Scott Ratner edit of The Thin Man. As we were prone to do in this, I mean, I know that's nerdy, but I know a lot of people. It's actually because I would give The Thin Man to people and I recommend it. And I'd have people tell me, I watched 10 minutes of 5 minutes of that and it just didn't draw me in, because to a modern perspective, there's very little to draw them in. If you're if you are an Edward Ellis fan, if you are a Natalie Moorhead fan, if you're used to watching early 1930s films, it might, be of interest to you. But it doesn't work. And I'm not alone in saying that. Pauline Kael said, there's a lot of plot exposition, and by modern standards, the storytelling is very leisurely. Well, she's not really talking about Nick and Nora there. She's talking about those first 10 minutes. And actually, after those first 10 minutes, it goes to Nick and Nora for about 5 minutes, and then goes away from Nick and Nora again for close to 9 minutes. And that second 9 minutes, I think, is probably needed. But my edit was just from the opening credits right to the bar scene. And I gave it to people, and I'll tell you, it's a tighter and better film. There are 2 little things in those 10 and a half minutes. One is an exposition thing, is the types of metal ore, knowing what that is, and knowing that that's his keychain. That is a watch chain, that is.
An actual clue.
An actual clue, but it's an actual false clue, ultimately.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it really doesn't point you to the murderer because it's a clue that's supposed to incriminate Clyde Wynant. It was placed there by the murderer to, So it's a clue, but it's a clue that is explained later before the denouement. So even though you wouldn't learn it as early, you would wonder when Mimi says it's your father's and shows it to Dorothy, and Dorothy is horrified, you wouldn't know exactly why she's horrified or what the connection is. That's one thing. And there's another psychological deception that I like very, very much in that opening sequence, which is the little bit with Douglas Fowley as the taxi driver cheating Macaulay on his tip saying, don't worry, I got it all. I took it out already, which is kind of nice, not only as a comic moment, but kind of shows Macaulay to be a schlemiel, a nudge, a victim. That helps psychologically the deception aspect, but it's not necessary. There's nothing in there that's necessary. I also edited a few little moments out of the scene in the warehouse because it's so dark and it can be tightened up.
Right. So this is the Ratner supercut.
The Ratner supercut. It's about 13 minutes shorter, and it's a tighter and more effective film. And if people are a little confused by the plotting because it comes so quickly, well, they are anyway. They are even with the film as we know it. The big argument, though, against the people who say these are necessary moments is the 1941 film, The Maltese Falcon, which is based on a novel which has a very similar structure, if you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
A woman approaches a world-weary detective about, a missing loved one. Soon after, somebody is killed. And then from that point on, this detective doesn't really need to leave home very much because he's bombarded by all the suspects coming to him. And eventually he solves it. That's actually, I don't think anybody would claim that The Maltese Falcon is a plot-driven movie or story.
Well, if they are, they're kind of missing the point. Yeah.
They are missing the point, but it's got more cluing payoff at the end than The Thin Man does, novel or film. And so it really, if any one of the films has a right to have this exposition at the start, it would be The Maltese Falcon. But they knew not to include that. No one's ever complained. I mean, people look at The Maltese Falcon as sort of a model of narrative efficiency. The film doesn't resonate with me personally as much as The Thin Man does because I'm more into Nick and Nora Charles than I am to Sam Spade. But at the same time, there's nobody complaining about the fact that we don't have scenes with Floyd Thursby at the start.
Although, you know what? I actually wouldn't have minded because sometimes I do slightly lose track of who's who. Probably a sign of getting older. And so I always, if I had a face to go with the name, that might have helped me. But of course it's, but I tell you what, my favorite supercut story, I am the proud uncle of 2 twin nieces. Well, can you have 3 twin nieces? I don't think you can. It's only 2. But when they were growing up, one of their favorite films was The Sound of Music. But what they didn't know until they turned about 15 was that they were only being screened a cut version of The Sound of Music. And basically what they did was, and I thought this is genius, is that my brother and his wife, they used to show them the film and then they would stop at the wedding sequence. So in other words, it's only 2 hours long and you take the Nazis out of it. You know what? I think that's genius.
Well, that's genius for showing young kids. I think it's problematic because I think society might pick up on that, and I think we're taking the Nazis out of things that they should be. We need to be reminded the Nazis were there. But you're right, for kids.
I thought that was perfect. Well, also from their point of view, it ends with a wedding. Of course, it ends with a wedding.
Right. That's where all happy endings, happy movies end, with the wedding. Yeah.
So looking at the film version of The Thin Man, then, so we've got the Hacketts, who are not so much hacking as adding stuff, in fact, in this case, and taking some other things out, of course. There's an element, and it's very much true of one of our favorite films, of course, Green for Danger. Green for Danger is another film where the filmmaker was not, in fact, a big fan of whodunits. So although it's one of the great movie whodunits, and it's just a fantastic film anyway, it's also a film that is quite subtly in some respects and not in others guying the genre. It's slightly making fun of it. The detective quite often make mistakes. He, smugly opens a book that he's reading, a murder mystery, peeks at the end to see who done it and discovers he got it wrong. Things like that. You're making fun of this kind of stuff. And yet it works brilliantly because it's funny and it's clever. In the case of The Thin Man, the Hacketts, not having really spotted, shall we say, the more ironic intent of the novel, create a wonderfully entertaining film. Does it work better, do you think, as a detective story, even though they haven't really added any clues, just because it falls within that genre more easily? Whereas in actual fact, the novel is in a way might actually surprise but also disappoint some readers who are looking for something like that. You know, they're thinking they're going to get a Francis and Richard Lockridge book, and they're kind of not.
Well, I think that in terms of plotting, you have purposely bad plotting in the novel. And I'm saying that they're loose ends for a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And there's that, and I admit most people don't get it, but there definitely is. If you read it, with this in mind, you look at it and say, oh yeah, he did that on purpose for this reason. And that reason is taken out. So what you have is, in the film, you just have a weak version of the type of story that Hammett was critiquing. In other words, you go from you can't call it critical metafiction because Nick is not aware he's in a fiction, but it certainly is a critique.
Yes, it's not postmodern, but sure, yeah.
Right. And what you now have is you have a kind of pallid mystery that's not worth much. And you have brilliant, brilliant character comedy. Of course, this is all subjective, but I personally don't feel character comedy has ever gotten any better. So I look at this as a film, which is maybe 2/3 pretty nothing. But that 1/3 is so strong that it really makes it a moot point. Anybody who does care about that is going to be like me at age 12, disappointed.
So if we can channel that 12-year-old lad just a moment,
right?
How do you think it compares with the two sequels that followed, that Hammett provided the basic storyline for and did a reasonable amount of script work on with the Hackett's? So we've got After the Thin Man and Another Thin Man. Do you feel like they're, in fact, surprisingly more strongly plotted, better clued?
Well, it's not surprisingly, but yes. Hammett was deeply involved with both of them.
Yeah.
As I think you probably know. That story by credit that he's given gives people the idea that he wrote a 2-page plot outline, that they took it and added all the humor to it. That's one of the great myths of the whole Thin Man series, is that Hammett wasn't deeply involved with the comedy aspect and the character relationship. He's as deeply involved as they are, at least. All they did, I think, was, they added some nice jokes of their own, but they lightened the characters. They made them less troubled. A lot of the witty lines are from the book. These are just from the first 13 pages of the Kindle edition. So that's the first 8% of the novel that show that were adapted and made their way into the film in some form or another. All right. First one is Nora said she's pretty. If you like them like that. She grinned at me. You got types? Only you, darling. Lanky brunettes with wicked jaws. And then there's, darling, I said, my guess is that Wynant killed her and the police will catch him without any of my help. Anyway, it's nothing in my life. I didn't mean that, but besides, I haven't time. I'm too busy trying to see that you don't lose any of the money I married you for. Then there's, don't you think maybe a drink would help you to sleep? No, thanks. Maybe it would if I took one. Then there's, Nora screwed up her eyes at me and asked slowly, what are you holding out on me? Oh dear, I said. I was hoping I wouldn't have to tell you. Dorothy is really my daughter. I didn't know what I was doing, Nora. It was spring in Venice, and I was so young, and there was a moon over the cutoff. Then there's, Quinn came over to refill his glass. He looked towards the bedroom door. Where do you find the little blonde? He used to bounce it on my knee. Which knee, he asked. Could I touch it? And then even the moment, that relationship encapsulating moment of Nora walking in on Dorothy in Nick's arms is in the novel. It's right here. Nora, coming in to answer the telephone, looked questioningly at me. I made a face at her over the girl's head. When Nora said hello into the telephone, the girl stepped back quickly away from me and blushed. I'm sorry, she stammered. I didn't. Nora smiled sympathetically at her. I said, don't be a dope. And the only thing missing there is, Myrna's scrunched up nose.
And it's a classic moment in the movie. It worked partly because of the way it's shot, of course, which is with a kind of whip pan. And
right.
And it's that's the upside of having W.S. Van Dyke do it. I think Woody knew how to do that, and it works great. Yeah.
It's one of the things that makes the film unique, because all of a sudden you set up a paradigm that we've seen in so many films. Someone walks into somebody's arms, and then the wife comes in, and there's jealousy. And this, if there's any moment in the film which explains the relationship of Nick and Nora, it's the moment right there where she's looking at him and she's not jealous. She knows, their relationship is secure. And he looks at her with a look of, so what? I've got a gorgeous woman in my arms. Take it. And the whole idea that, A, she's not jealous, but it's not as if Nick is oblivious to, Maureen O'Sullivan's charms. It's almost like the line that, the famous line cut out of the
of
the novel. That's referring to a different moment. But at the same time, it's almost like that. It's like, yeah, he's going to get excited when there are women around, sexy women around, but that's not any threat to their relationship. So the idea that the Hacketts brought in all the humor and almost were like Billy Wilder was to Witness for the Prosecution is a total myth. The humor is all there. What they did is lighten up the characters.
Actually, there's an interesting little through line there, of course, because Witness for the Prosecution, Thin Man Goes Home, and Fast Company were all co-written by the same guy, Harry Kurnitz.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah, unfair for me to not give Kurnitz a common thing to do when you're working with Billy Wilder, right? To forget the co-writers.
Well,
but Kurnitz.
Well, he famously called Wilder, Mr. Hyde and Mr. Hyde.
Mr. Hyde and Mr. Hyde, yeah, exactly. Kurnitz was a great influence, and but I think there is the major myth that has to be broken, that Dashiell Hammett wrote a detective story and the Hacketts came in and gave it all the humor and the characters, and that's not true at all.
You made any New Year's resolutions?
Not yet. Any complaints or suggestions?
Few. You don't scold, you don't nag, and you look far too pretty in the mornings.
All right, I'll remember. Must scold, must nag, mustn't be too pretty in the mornings.
But yes, they were written as puzzle plots. And it's a little unfortunate because the studio still didn't know how to handle puzzle plotting. Have you read the two follow-up treatments?
Yes, the Return of the Thin Man book. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Which is fascinating.
First of all, they're excellent, but it is fascinating. And one of the things is there's quite a bit of puzzle plotting that Hammett put in there that they just miss. Yeah. One is in the case of the, I guess you would call it cheating on the surplus knowledge clue in After the Thin Man, the photograph. The fact that we don't see the photograph until the denouement is, by most people's, estimation, cheating. Well, in the treatment, it is there earlier. She shows it, and Hammett describes it, the people in the picture, and you see them earlier on in the story, pre-denouement. So he's not cheating with that clue. Also, there is a slightly cheesy, but still, to me, wonderful dying message clue. Very similar to the one in Knives Out, of someone, dying and their last words being misinterpreted. And I don't think it's necessarily a great example of that, but just having it adds a lot. But somehow that got dropped, which I think is too bad. Because I really think that Hammett came to this project realizing, nobody's interested in the point I was making in The Thin Man. So if you can't beat him, join him. I know how to write clues. And so he did. And so even though they still botched them up, he put them into the treatments. The third film, you got a basic plot that's sort of based on Agatha Christie's The Mysterious Affair at Styles, the basic deception on the part of the culprit, what they're trying to do with double jeopardy and stuff like that. Yeah. It's more directly based on Hammett's own short story. Is it The Farewell Clue? Yeah, maybe it is.
Short intervention. This is Sergio here. Just to say, shortly after we recorded this episode, Scott and I both realised that the title of the story was in fact The Farewell Murder, which Dashiell Hammett had published in Black Mask magazine in 1930, just before he headed off to Hollywood. So now you know. Let's get back to what Scott has to say.
I have no idea whether Hammett came to that on his own or whether he got it from Christie or whatever, but it's the same basic idea, which is a good, clever idea. And then there's some other clues in there too, which are very shortly treated and briefly alluded to in the denouement, but in a way that's like MGM, they just, glide past it. Obviously no denouement flashbacks or anything like that. One of them is the point of the character played by Burt Roach, whose name is Cookie, actually, in the screenplay, who Dum punches out because he's just about to give Phil Church an alibi. And it's a great clue, I think. Why would someone devoted to Phil Church punch someone who is about to give Phil Church an alibi? Well, there's a good reason, because it would ruin that whole double jeopardy thing. So that's a great clue. And then there's also the clue about there being no pillows on the bed.
Yes. So,
which I guess is fairly presented, but just, rattled off at the end in the denouement. So I don't think MGM knew a bit about how to present these clues and make them have any power. But they're there because they're written as whodunits. They're not written as anti-puzzle plot whodunits, which the first novel was.
If you were looking at them sort of objectively, those three films, the three Hammett Thin Man films, let's put it that way, which do you think is the one that comes across as the film with the best plot, best as a detective story?
Best as a detective, another Thin Man.
Okay.
Which I think is the best balance in the series between plot and character. I don't know if that's what's desired as a balance between the two.
Mommy, this is Creep's binder. Remember?
Creeps, yeah, Creeps, you remember? Nick sent me up the river.
Oh, well, it's nice you don't feel bad about it.
Well, why should I? Gee, it took a genius to outsmart me.
You want to touch me?
I got rid of all those reporters.
What'd you tell them?
Told them we were out of scotch.
What a gruesome thought.
And I happen to be a big fan of the film. I think it has some wonderful comedy moments in it, too. The nightclub scene is the best nightclub scene in any of the films. All the Bella Spruce stuff and things like that. Great stuff. But it also has the best plot of those three from a detective angle. You may know I have a real love-hate relationship with After the Thin Man, because I think it's I think it has some wonderful comedy in it, and the cluing is better. But there are things that really bother me. There's a mean-spiritedness about the second half of the film. I don't just mean a general cynicism that the series has, but it just doesn't really like Nick very much. It makes Nick to be kind of a mean guy, which is only counteracted by the fact that Powell still plays him so charmingly. People don't notice, but instead of sending Nora off in a taxi, he's locking her in a room, and he's leaving her in jail overnight. And
yeah.
And there's also a cheapening in After the Thin Man. I think of a lot of things. I really never minded the whole Nick Jr. stuff that came up. Everybody was afraid that was going to ruin the series. I don't really think it does. I think it's mostly charming. But the stuff with Asta in the second film is just like the worst of CGI in contemporary films. I think, Asta is adorable because you let him be Asta. You don't have to trick him up. And to give him Mickey Mousing music with all his little antics with his, cuckolding wife. It's cutesy. It's cutesy to a point that really annoys me. A lot of people think that's the best film in the series, but I see it as not as fresh as the first film, and also mean-spirited at times. And also it messes up, as I say, its puzzle plotting, genuine puzzle plotting, which Hammett, had added to it.
The second film, it's a bigger budget. It's, almost half an hour longer. It's got James Stewart, which I think, who is at that point a pretty new actor.
And he does a great job.
And he does a great job. Yeah, and he's got a good role in it, and he does it well. And I think it works. And again, it's beautifully shot. But in a way, as the films progress, almost instantly, they feel more, shall we say, MGM-y.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I think that's, and as you say, I think...
I call it MGM-ified. Like they're mummified by MGM. Yeah,
I think you're right. I think they got bigger but not better. Yeah.
I don't mean to bash MGM so much, because there were some really wonderful films that came from MGM, including the Thin Man series. But they had that effect on things. They couldn't let things go.
We've talked a little bit about how important the first one was, just because it was such a success, and it was the second of what would be 13 films that Powell and Loy make together.
14, actually.
Is it 14? I know one of them is basically a cameo, right?
Right. The 14th one is a cameo. The Senator was indiscreet. Yeah.
Yeah. There were, as a result, a number of films that were made in that style, including films being made by William Powell as well.
Right.
So he would go off to RKO and make a couple of similar films. What do you think about some of these? How do you think it compares with other similar, shall we say, comedy whodunits from that era? From the 1930s, what do you think? How does it stand up?
People will use they'll use the word "it was unique," and it was unique. And I think that William K. Everson, who I love his books, and I generally agree with him, but he said he was talking about the difference between It Happened One Night and The Thin Man, because he was talking in one of his books about 1934 being a turning point, and there being three major influence films on the screwball comedy, being 20th Century, It Happened One Night, and The Thin Man. And he was talking about all the cheap knockoffs of It Happened One Night. And he said, at least the Thin Man imitators, it had a salutary effect on the industry. I don't think it did. In fact, I think just the opposite. I think the Thin Man is wonderful. It's amazing. I say it's concentrated in those Nick and Nora scenes, but it's just beyond anything else cinema ever gave us. That said, the knockoffs, because it was so successful, it clearly gave producers the idea that the interest in detective films are the detective characters. And there's that whole thing to the I think it's the Hal Wallace or maybe Jack Warner memo to Michael Curtiz to add some of the Thin Man style to The Case of the Curious Bride. And that was going on all throughout, and you can see it in all these films. There were a lot of Thin Man copycats, but they made it all about the characters. And unfortunately, that's for the most part, the only detective films we got for the rest of the decade. There are some exceptions. There are some rare exceptions. You have that in, the Ex Mrs. Bradford with Powell and Jean Arthur, who are delightful together. But it's just a trap at the end. There's no clues. Star of Midnight, which Powell also made with Ginger Rogers. Not quite as good a comedy, I would say, in terms of its comedy level. And it's plotting a little better, but still, they're still making it about the characters. Then you had all the Sally Reardon films and the Fast Company films with Melvin Douglas and Florence Rice, and later Fran Chatone, and I'm mixing them up. Who's on the
Rosalind Russell, and they changed the cast in every single one of the three films. It's really annoying.
Right, they're still trying to make it all about the characters. It's one of my favorite films. My favorite film in 1934. I'm a list person, so I have these things in mind. It's my favorite film in 1934. My second favorite film of the 30s, and in my top 10 films of all time. But that said, I don't think its influence was good. You really didn't have great cluing in films again until the mid-1940s, when you had together Green for Danger, and Then There Were None, and The Verdict, which are terrific films and terrific puzzle plot films as far as I'm concerned. But that interest was gone for the rest of the 30s. And I think it's too bad. And I think it's partially due to, or in a large part due to, the success of The Thin Man.
So to finish up then, if we wanted to think about and I think you may have just named them all, but the ones that a kind of proper puzzle plotted movie from, let's call it the golden age of Hollywood, so roughly 30s, 40s, and maybe the 50s, what would be the film that you would recommend to listeners of the podcast that they should seek out?
Well, there's one they can't seek out. It's too bad because it's hard to get to. It's Love Letters of a Star. But I would go for Kendall Murder Case, which is not particularly strong in cluing, but has some, a lot of great puzzle plot elements. As I say, Green for Danger. And Then There Were None really does have a lot of cluing in it, but people don't realize it. And it's not the cluing that the culprit calls attention to at the end of the book. The Verdict. These are all great puzzle plots. What's interesting, and I go back to The Thin Man for 1 second here, is I think there seems to be an inverse relationship, an unnecessary inverse relationship between good puzzle plotting in the series and good character comedy. Because I actually think the plot of The Thin Man Goes Home is pretty good. There's some good stuff in that. I don't like watching the film because I hate what it does to the characters, particularly Nora. So it's an inverse relationship. And a lot of people would say, well, the more you're interested in plotting, the less you're interested in character, and vice versa. I don't think that's so. I think, as I say, Knives Out shows that to be wrong. Green for Danger shows that to be wrong. A lot of things show that to be wrong. A lot of, the best Death in Paradise episodes. Puzzle plot films? Are you talking from any era?
Well, I was going to say, just one that you would recommend. It says, start here to see if this is for you.
Oh, I think it's the one we saw in 1978.
Death on the Nile.
I think that's the way to present a whodunit. Maybe a little overlong, but, that's about it for my complaints on it. And Last of Sheila even though Last of Sheila may be a little hitting them over the head too hard with it. But yeah, it's interestingly enough, I would say films from the 70s, even Knives Out. And there are a lot of films from the 30s that come close, but I wouldn't say as high as those.
What did you think of Glass Onion, by the way?
I liked a lot of it. Again, it got bigger, and bigger to me is usually not better. One of the things I loved about Knives Out is I almost expected there to be like 3 other climaxes because of so many films these days having extended climaxes. I thought, and I really liked the fact that it didn't. It just had a nice full little denouement, and then boom, it was out. So I enjoyed that. But with Glass Onion, the whole thing seemed to get a little bigger. But also the central deception in it, the central relationship of the culprit to the plot, let's put it that way, is what I've always considered, whodunit film solution 1A. It's the most overused solution. And I was saying, oh, I hope they're not going here. And they went there.
I've invited you all to my island.
Hi.
Because tonight, a murder will be committed. My murder.
Once you're dead, will we still be able to talk to you?
Yeah, I'm not playing dead the whole weekend, dude.
This is truly delightful.
Across the island, I've hidden clues. You will have to closely observe each other. If anyone can name the killer, that person wins our game. Any questions?
Halle Berry, that has a kick.
Oh my God, what happened? Holy
However, the basic other central reversal, the twist about the intelligence level of a central character. How's that?
Yes.
Is that? I thought that was wonderful. I thought that was great. And I liked a lot of all the other things. Unfortunately, the central deception was not very strong for me. So I didn't like it nearly as much.
Okay.
And I felt too bad because you had you had Angela Lansbury and Stephen Sondheim in their final film. And it would have been nice to see them go out in one of the great ones. There's a Glass Onion, I think, has a lot to offer, but I think Knives Out was much better film.
Are you looking forward to the next one?
Absolutely, which is evidently very car influenced.
Yes, seems to be the case. And in fact, did you? I don't know if you got that edition of Cars, The Problem with the Wire Cage, and Rian Johnson did the intro for it.
Oh no!
Yeah, the American Classics edition from Otto Penzler. They put out a new one. I think it was last year, and they got Johnson to write it. So he's been rereading those books. Hopefully this is all a good thing. I don't mean that it's that book. I just mean that he's a fan of Car.
Right, and I think he gets it also. I think we saw that from Knives Out. He got the clues are interesting. They're not just a lot of them thrown in. I was disappointed by the central deception of the Glass Onion.
I didn't see it coming.
Oh.
We're talking about the identity thing, right?
The identity of the culprits.
Oh, not the culprit. Sorry, I meant the person who seemingly winds up dead halfway through, and then we flash back. I didn't see that
I love
coming.
That was great.
Sorry. Okay, fine. Okay, because I thought you would like that. I was a bit surprised. Yes, I know what you mean. The culprit bit is disappointing, and also I'm still ticked off about the whole Mona Lisa thing because I thought that was just mean. And I'm just still annoyed about it. I don't know why that was a liberating moment for that character, destroying, one of the greatest pieces of Italian art ever made, but never mind. But that's neither here nor there.
I know. No, I know what you're saying. But, it's the kind of thing that someone has to pat you on the shoulder and go, Sergio, it's just a movie.
It's just a
they
movie,
didn't
right?
Really destroy the Mona Lisa. But you're right.
You know what, though? To bring us full circle, though, of course, what's nice is, of course, Rian Johnson doing Poker Face, which, of course, is his big tribute to 1970s TV and specifically Columbo, which I love the way that even the graphics of the title sequence, the fonts and the colors are made to look like Universal Studios stuff from the 1970s. Yeah, I think that's marvelous.
I really love what he's doing. And I think and although I think there are a lot of people interested in right now and a lot of good writers writing good puzzle plot mysteries, I think we have a renaissance there. We need Rian Johnson. We need someone making major motion pictures and major television series. And I think we're in good hands with him. My little qualms with Glass Onion aside, he's the man to do it.
Well, on that note, it's been brilliant to have you here, Scott, and I really hope we get to do it again. But thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much. I've really had a absolutely wonderful time.
Hey, take care, mate, and hopefully we'll do this all again very, very soon.
Thanks.
listening to Tipping My Fedora, the show about all things noir. It is produced for Castiglione Publishing by me, Sergio Angelini, and our theme tune is by Petar Milinkovic, whose work is available through Tailkeeper Music. All audio clips are the copyright of their respective owners, and used under fair dealing and fair use exceptions solely for the purposes of criticism and review. Please subscribe to Tipping My Fedora wherever you get your podcast fix, and it would be great if you could leave ratings and reviews about the show at Apple Podcasts. Be seeing you.